The Book of 1 Maccabees is a powerful narrative filled with rebellion, unwavering faith, and miraculous victories, yet it is not found in the Western Christian Bible. This absence raises the question, why was this inspiring book excluded? The answer lies in the complex history of biblical canonization, particularly during the Protestant Reformation. Reformers like Martin Luther sought to align the Bible more closely with the Hebrew Scriptures, leading to the exclusion of several texts that were not part of the traditional Hebrew Bible, including 1 Maccabees. As a result, many Western Christian denominations relegated this book to the margins, despite its historical and spiritual significance. However, 1 Maccabees was not lost entirely. It has been preserved in sacred canons of the Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, and notably in the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. These branches of Christianity recognize the book's profound spiritual and historical value, ensuring its message of resistance, faith, and divine intervention continues to inspire generations. The Book of 1 Maccabees offers a vivid account of the Jewish struggle against the oppressive forces of the Seleucid Empire under King Antiochus Epiphanes, who sought to erase Jewish identity by outlawing Jewish practices and defiling their temple. This period of intense persecution became the backdrop for one of the most remarkable uprisings in Jewish history, led by figures like Mattathias and his son Judas Maccabeus. Their rebellion was not just about military strategy. It was about standing firm in their faith, preserving their religious practices, and defending their identity against tyranny. The exclusion of 1 Maccabees from the Protestant Bible is significant because it deprives readers of a story that speaks directly to the universal human struggle for faith and freedom. It is a story that calls us to reflect on the cost of standing up for our beliefs and the sacrifices that sometimes come with remaining true to our faith, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. The Book of 1 Maccabees may have been banned from the Western canon, but it continues to resonate deeply with those who seek to understand the enduring struggle for religious freedom, divine deliverance, and the power of faith in the darkest times. The backdrop of the Book of 1 Maccabees is set during one of the most challenging times for the Jewish people, a period of intense oppression under the Seleucid Empire. Following the death of Alexander the Great, his vast empire fractured into multiple smaller kingdoms, one of which was the Seleucid Empire in Syria. Judea, located between two powerful empires, found itself caught in the middle. Initially, this position brought some stability as the Jewish people were able to maintain their faith and identity. However, this relative peace soon gave way to tension, especially as Hellenistic culture began to spread across the region. Greek language, philosophy, and religious practices began to infiltrate Jewish society, creating a divide between those who embraced these foreign customs and those who remained committed to the Torah. The tension escalated under the rule of Antiochus Epiphanes, a ruthless and arrogant king who sought to completely assimilate his subjects. Antiochus, whose name meant God manifest, viewed himself as a divine figure, and he used this belief to justify his cruel measures against the Jewish people. He outlawed key Jewish practices, including circumcision, Sabbath observance, and the study of the Torah, and he went so far as to desecrate the Jewish temple in Jerusalem by erecting an altar to Zeus and sacrificing pigs within the holy sanctuary. This defilement was a direct assault on the heart of Jewish faith and identity. Yet, even in the face of such brutal oppression, the Jewish people's spirit did not break. Rather than succumb to forced cultural assimilation, many remained fiercely determined to hold on to their faith, no matter the cost. Some of the Jewish people, known as the Hasidim, resisted the pressure to abandon their traditions, refusing to bow to the demands of Antiochus. This resistance was not just about politics, it was a profound spiritual battle, one that would lead to the spark of a rebellion. It was in this dark time, when Jewish identity and faith seemed to be on the verge of eradication, that the seeds of revolt were planted. The question of how to respond to such oppression would define the Jewish struggle for survival and freedom. Would they compromise to protect their lives, or would they choose to stand firm in their faith, risking everything for the chance to reclaim their right to worship the God of Israel? This is the world in which the Maccabean revolt began, a world where oppression seemed overwhelming, but where faith and resistance would ultimately shine through. In the midst of the Jewish people's suffering and oppression, a powerful spark of rebellion was ignited by one man. Mattathias, a priest from the town of Modian. His story is one of defiance, courage, and a steadfast commitment to his faith. Mattathias was a man deeply rooted in the traditions of the Torah, and when the king's officers came to Modian with orders to force the people to offer sacrifices to Greek gods, Mattathias was confronted with a critical decision. His role as a respected priest placed him in a unique position of leadership, and the king's officer expected him to comply. The officer's words were filled with threats of reward and punishment. If Mattathias followed the king's command, his family would be honored, and others would follow his example. But Mattathias, in a moment of profound conviction, refused to bow to the pressure. Even if all the nations under the king's dominion obey him, he declared, I, my sons, and my brothers will walk in the covenant of our fathers. In that moment, he made a powerful stand for his faith, rejecting the king's demands in favor of remaining true to the God of Israel. As Mattathias spoke, a Jewish man in the crowd, fearing the king's wrath, stepped forward to offer a sacrifice on the pagan altar. This act of betrayal was too much for Mattathias to bear. With righteous anger, he struck down the man and the king's officer, declaring to all who were present, Let everyone who is zealous for the law and supports the covenant come with me. This was the spark that ignited the Maccabean revolt. Mattathias and his sons fled to the wilderness, where they were joined by others who shared their commitment to God and their desire to fight for their faith and freedom. In the wilderness, they waged guerrilla warfare against the forces of Antiochus, striking swiftly and disappearing into the rugged terrain before the enemy could retaliate. Though they were outnumbered and poorly equipped, Mattathias and his followers were motivated by something much stronger than military power. They had a deep, unshakable faith in God. Mattathias's leadership, both spiritual and tactical, was the foundation of their success. He reminded them of the mighty acts of God in their history, encouraging them with words of courage and trust. Be strong and courageous. Do not fear them, for the battle belongs to the Lord. Mattathias's defiance and refusal to compromise became a beacon of hope, not just for his immediate followers, but for generations to come. His unwavering faith in God's power and his refusal to bow to tyranny set the stage for one of the most inspiring revolts in Jewish history. Judas Maccabeus, the son of Mattathias, rose to become a legendary figure whose courage, faith, and tactical brilliance turned the tide of the Maccabean revolt. Following the death of his father, Judas took command of the resistance and led his followers through some of the most pivotal battles of their struggle for freedom. His leadership was not only marked by his military acumen, but also by his unshakable belief that God was with them in every fight. Judas inspired his warriors with a message of faith and courage, reminding them of the divine intervention that had delivered their ancestors from Egypt. He urged them not to fear their enemies, no matter how large or powerful, for the battle ultimately belonged to the Lord. Despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned by the Seleucid army, Judas and his followers achieved incredible victories. One of the most significant of these came at the Battle of Emos, where Judas used brilliant strategy to outmaneuver a far superior enemy force. Judas knew that a direct confrontation with the enemy would lead to certain defeat, so he devised a bold plan to create a decoy position, drawing the Seleucid forces into an ambush. As the enemy attacked the feigned position, Judas and his troops struck from the rear, catching the enemy completely off guard. The victory at Emos was nothing short of miraculous, demonstrating not just Judas's tactical genius, but also the resilience and faith of his men. The victory sent a message that the Maccabees were not to be underestimated, and it encouraged more people to join the fight for freedom. But Judas's challenges were far from over. The Seleucid forces regrouped and prepared for a more decisive battle at the strategic fortress of Beth Zur. The stakes could not have been higher. If the Seleucids captured Beth Zur, they would have been in a position to march on Jerusalem and crush the Maccabean revolt once and for all. But Judas, confident in his faith and leadership, rallied his men and led them into battle. With God's help and a well-executed strategy, the Maccabees once again defeated the Seleucid army, securing another critical victory. These victories were not just military triumphs, they were spiritual victories for the Jewish people. Every battle won reaffirmed their belief that God had not abandoned them and that he was guiding their every step. Judas Maccabeus became a symbol of hope and strength during one of the darkest periods in Jewish history, and his unwavering faith continues to inspire believers to stand firm in the face of adversity. The rededication of the temple was one of the most significant moments in Jewish history, marking not only a military victory, but a profound spiritual renewal. After Judas Maccabeus and his followers had successfully driven out the Seleucid forces and reclaimed Jerusalem, their next mission was to cleanse the temple, which had been desecrated by Antiochus IV Epiphanes. The temple, once the center of Jewish worship and the dwelling place of God's presence, had been defiled. Pagan idols had been set up in its court, and an altar to Zeus had been placed in the holy sanctuary, where pigs had been sacrificed in a direct affront to the God of Israel. The Jewish people had endured great suffering under Antiochus's oppressive reign, but the temple's desecration was the final blow to their faith and identity. Now, with the Maccabees in control, they set out to restore what had been lost. The process of cleansing the temple was intense, as every trace of pagan influence had to be removed. Idols were smashed, and the polluted altar was dismantled and replaced with a new one, built according to the laws of the Torah. The holy furnishings, including the golden menorah and the table for the bread of the presence, were restored with reverence, each piece symbolizing the Jewish people's renewed commitment to God. But the most extraordinary moment came when the time arrived to consecrate the temple. There was only enough consecrated oil to keep the menorah burning for a single day. The oil, which was essential for the temple's lighting, needed to be purified before it could be used, a process that would take 8 days. Faced with this scarcity, the people decided to light the menorah anyway, trusting that God would provide. In a miraculous act of divine intervention, the small amount of oil burned not for 1 day, but for 8, until new oil could be prepared. This miracle was seen as a sign of God's favor, reminding the people that his power was not bound by human limitations. The rededication of the temple was not just a physical act of cleansing, it was a powerful spiritual declaration. It was a reminder that God had not abandoned his people, even in their darkest hours, and that he would continue to guide them. To commemorate this miraculous event, the festival of Hanukkah was established, a celebration of light, dedication, and divine intervention. Each year, Jewish families light the menorah, not only to remember the miracle of the oil, but to honor the courage, faith, and perseverance of the Maccabees, who fought to restore the temple and preserve the Jewish faith. The cost of resistance during the Maccabean revolt was immeasurable, and for many, The ultimate price was their lives. The courageous acts of defiance, the victories on the battlefield, and the reclamation of their temple were powerful, but they came at a great cost. One of the most harrowing and poignant stories of martyrdom comes not directly from 1 Maccabees, but from 2 Maccabees, which complements the narrative of the rebellion. It tells of a mother and her 7 sons who were arrested and brought before King Antiochus of Epiphanes for refusing to eat pork, an act that was a direct violation of God's laws. Antiochus, furious with their defiance, offered them the chance to save their lives if they would renounce their faith and comply with his commands. But each of the sons, one by one, refused to abandon their beliefs. As each brother faced the king's brutal punishment, he declared his trust in God and his hope in the resurrection, firmly stating that they would rather die than transgress the laws of their ancestors. The eldest brother spoke first, saying, "We are ready to die rather than transgress the laws of our ancestors." The mother, witnessing the horrific torture and death of each of her sons, showed incredible strength and faith. When the youngest son was brought forward, Antiochus offered him wealth and power if he would renounce his faith. Yet, the boy, inspired by his mother's unwavering belief, refused to give in. The mother encouraged him to embrace martyrdom, believing that their sacrifice would not end in defeat but in eternal victory. Her words were a testament to her unshakable faith in God's promises. The bravery of this mother and her sons stands as a stark example of the cost of faithfulness to God, even in the face of brutal oppression. Their defiance was not only an act of personal courage, but a declaration of their unwavering trust in God's justice and deliverance. The story of the mother and her sons is one of many instances where the Jewish people, during this time of extreme persecution, chose to endure unimaginable suffering rather than compromise their faith. Their courage and willingness to face death, instead of renouncing their God, became a powerful inspiration for others to continue the fight for freedom. In the face of unspeakable cruelty, it was faith in the God who had delivered their ancestors that sustained them. This unwavering faith, in turn, fueled the larger Maccabean resistance, reminding the people that the fight was not just for land or freedom, but for their very souls and the preservation of their covenant with God. The story of the Maccabees is far from isolated. It is intricately woven into the larger narrative of the Bible, echoing themes that resonate throughout both the Old and New Testaments. The courage, faith, and leadership displayed by figures like Mattathias and Judas Maccabeus reflect the broader pattern of God's deliverance throughout Scripture. In many ways, the Maccabean revolt mirrors the story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt. Just as Moses led his people through the wilderness, confronting Pharaoh's oppression with faith in God's power, Judas Maccabeus stood firm against the overwhelming forces of the Seleucid Empire, trusting that God would fight for his people. The battles fought by the Maccabees were not simply military campaigns. They were deeply spiritual struggles, reminiscent of the spiritual battles faced by the Israelites in the time of the Exodus. Likewise, the Maccabees' efforts to reclaim and purify the temple in Jerusalem are similar to Joshua's command to sanctify the land and dedicate it to God's service. Both leaders understood that their struggle was not just about territorial or political victories. It was about the preservation of their covenant with God and the sanctification of his holy space. The rededication of the temple, after the Maccabees had driven out the Seleucids, is a powerful symbol of spiritual renewal. It reflects the kind of dedication that David had in mind when he sought to build a permanent dwelling for God, a place where his presence could reside among his people. The Maccabees, like David, were deeply concerned with honoring God through their actions and decisions. The rededication of the temple also foreshadows the greater work of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. Just as the Maccabees fought to restore true worship in the temple, Jesus came to cleanse the hearts of his people and establish a new covenant through his sacrifice. The connection between the Maccabean revolt and the coming of Christ is profound. It was through the Maccabees' resistance that the Jewish faith and identity were preserved, creating the foundation for the world into which Jesus would be born. Moreover, the Maccabees' struggle ensured that the practices and traditions of the Jewish people survived during a time when Hellenistic influence threatened to erase them. Their defiance and dedication to God laid the groundwork for the cultural and spiritual environment in which Jesus would teach and ultimately offer himself as the ultimate sacrifice. The Maccabean revolt is not just a historical account. It is a vital part of the ongoing story of God's redemptive plan, pointing forward to the ultimate deliverance through Christ. The story of the Maccabees is not just a historical account. It is a powerful lesson in courage, perseverance, and the cost of standing firm in one's faith, which continues to challenge and inspire us today. The Maccabees fought not only for their land and political freedom, but for their very right to live out their faith, even in the face of persecution and death. Their unwavering commitment to God, even in the most oppressive and dangerous of times, speaks directly to our own struggles in a world that often challenges our beliefs. The faith of the Maccabees calls us to examine our own convictions. What are we willing to stand for? Are we ready to defend our beliefs, even when it costs us something? In a world where compromise is often seen as the easier path, the Maccabees challenge us to ask whether we are willing to sacrifice comfort, security, or even our lives to remain true to God's word. The cost of religious freedom was painfully real for the Maccabees. They endured personal loss, physical suffering, and emotional hardship. Yet they remained committed to defending the integrity of their faith and the sacred traditions passed down through generations. Their sacrifices remind us that the pursuit of true freedom to worship, to live according to our values, and to uphold what we believe is not always free from cost. Their story invites us to reflect on how we can be courageous in the face of opposition and how we can persevere, even when the odds seem insurmountable. It also challenges us to consider how we support others who face persecution for their faith. Just as the Maccabees stood together and inspired one another to remain faithful, we are called to support our brothers and sisters in Christ who are facing similar challenges today. The Maccabees story is ultimately a story of hope. It reminds us that though the cost of standing firm in our faith may be high, the rewards are even greater. Their faith in God's deliverance was not in vain. Just as they saw God's hand guiding them through their struggles, we can trust that He will guide us through our own battles. The Maccabees remind us that no matter how dark the times may seem, God is with us, and His light cannot be extinguished. Their legacy is one of resilience, reminding us that true freedom, rooted in faith, is worth every sacrifice.